Hey there, I'm Alan Furstenberg.
And I'm Mark Tucker, and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two voice devs. Hey Mark, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How about you?
It's been a busy and chaotic week on top of a couple of other busy and chaotic weeks, but I'm doing pretty well. Thank you.
No, it's good. We got things that are busy, kind of rolling towards a production release on my end. So that's always kind of a big last minute push, and sometimes surprises hit you. But
Yeah,
overall, it's moving pretty well.
but it's always nice to see those production goals to see where you're going,
Yes.
and yeah, that's always
Oh,
nice.
I am so excited for this one. So yeah, it'll be good when we finally get there. But were you able to catch the Amazon event? I think officially it was known as like the Amazon Devices and Services 2023 event.
Well, I did not for a couple of reasons. The first was that I was at Google the day that it happened, so I was in the middle of a bunch of other stuff. And second, it wasn't live streamed.
It was not. That was a little frustrating. We could watch blog updates from various different sites, Tom's Hardware or Engadget
Right.
or other places. They do have a video out, and we'll provide a link of the video of that, um, along with this post here. But yeah, I did have some time to watch but not all of the video, but I did follow along in real time, kind of trying to see what things I could glean
Right.
from the blog posts.
There's been a lot of interesting stuff that was announced. There's
Yeah,
there's new hardware. Some of it sounded pretty interesting. Um, there's refreshes on hardware, some of which, was making me kind of anxious, including, Echo Frames had an update.
yeah.
Um, but I think what everyone is talking about, and this really wasn't a big surprise, but maybe a little bit, is that large language models are coming to Alexa.
Yes, and so what was demoed at this event was a a 1P experience that would work, from, so 1P once again is Amazon provided, not developer custom provided. So a 1P experience where you could say, let's chat or let's talk. I think maybe it was let's talk, and then Amazon enters kind of this mode, which really can just be termed Chat GPT with voice, right? Um, it's and I'm sure Amazon would say that it's a lot more than that, but it is using large language model. It is kind of more open, free form. You can ask questions, and it responds back. And one of the things that they touted kind of under the covers is that there is a specific Alexa LLM, something that's not available to anybody other than Amazon at this point in time. But that it is meant to be faster in response, to voice. So there's not a big pause, delay,
Uh-huh.
when you
Okay.
talk. So it's supposed to try to mimic kind of the conversation flow that you would have if you were talking to a person.
So it's good that they addressed the one of the big issues that you and I have been talking
Yep.
about in this cross-pollination for a while. So that's good. And I think that I mean, we've talked before that there were some third-party integrations with ChatGPT, and the
Yes.
biggest issue with all of them is they were facing timeout limits and issues and restrictions.
Yeah. So
So
I've talked to somebody who's like worked on a skill that uses ChatGPT behind the scenes, and that they had to use uh, version 3.5 instead of 4 because 3.5 was maybe not as good with its generative capabilities, but it was faster. And I've done some experimenting as well with 3.5, and even that seemed that there were times where it was just way too slow,
yeah.
to have it be a fun conversation.
So it's interesting that Amazon has made sure to address that issue.
Yes.
They've brought that in, but I think they then, and I think this is what everyone was expecting, was that they were going to announce something like this.
Yeah.
I don't think what everyone was expecting was what else was going into this. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was, because this could go a couple different ways. I think they focused a lot in the first party experience, and I think that's going to trickle into what's available for developers a little later. But they've tried to build on some certain pillars. They talked specifically about 5 foundational capabilities that they want to build into their LLM, and we'll just kind of go through those somewhat quickly. But the first one is they do really want it to be conversational. They do want to be able to have this this ebb and flow to the conversation. Some of the capabilities that they showed or something that they're building into devices where you don't necessarily have to use the wake word. So you could use maybe the wake word to start the conversation, but once you're in this mode, if you've got a smart display device, then it can tell if you're looking at the device, and it will identify who you are based on a profile that you set up. And so you could turn away, have a conversation with somebody else, turn back, talk to the device.
Oh, very nice.
And not have to pick up again with the wake word.
So a great deal of conversational awareness.
Yeah.
Or contextual awareness.
Yeah. So contextual awareness on that. They're also really working on like the speed of the response, like we talked about. Also the succinctness, like how short the response is, kind of concise. And what they've talked about a lot in this context as well is that you want to be able to not just get information, but you also want to be able to do things. And that would tie into APIs that get called. That would also tie into smart home type of things. But it's not just conversation with chat to get content or information. It's also conversational with your devices. You can use a lot wider range of addressing your devices as opposed to calling it specifically by a certain name.
And I think the notion of controlling smart home, that's again interesting in this. I think what kind of grabbed me is that they were jumping whole hog on the plugin notion that we had talked about a few episodes back with OpenAI. Yeah. And what they were doing with the ChatGPT extensions. It sounds like Amazon did the exact same thing.
It does seem like that they've taken the same approach, or at least the same concept over from a high level. Yes,
and again, it's the same sort of approach that we talked about. We've talked about for years with Bixby capsules.
Yep.
I think the big difference here is that this is the big difference between Amazon doing it and OpenAI doing it is that Amazon understands the rest of the context that may be in the conversation. It knows who it is. It knows, a bunch of things about you. And maybe it will be passing some of that along to the API or making it available to the API in some cases.
Yeah. So that leads to the second point, is that they really feel that Amazon and these, devices live in the real world. So you're in context, the device is in a specific room, you're a specific person in a family, you've got certain devices, you've got kind of metadata about those devices, you've got metadata about personalized information about each of the people. So all that is available to the LLM. Kind of if we were thinking about behind the scenes, maybe some sort of vector database that has information about all this stuff, and it's able to pull that stuff in to the LLM and make it more context aware. So one of the things that they said earlier in the event was that they felt like a lot of the tools like ChatGPT, all of the generative LLMs that are out there are focused, whether they be web-based or mobile-based, in helping people to create content. And there's arguments, I guess, for and against
where they're coming from on that point. I think I think they're attending different conferences than I'm attending, but I see where they're coming from on that.
Yeah. So I think what the spin that they're trying to put on it is that they are focused on consumers. These devices are in customers' homes, and so they're focusing on solving problems for customers, which is different than for content creators. Now, I think there is a little bit of a spin in that.
I think there's a lot of spin in that.
But the thing that does ring true is that these devices do live in the real world, and they do live in customers' homes, and that is a little bit different experience than just more generically for this is, you know, on the web, this is in your browser. So that part is
Yes.
is the part I think that they were trying to focus on this second point about real world applications.
Well, but I think that more ties into this concept that they beat the drum on last year, and that's the ambient ubiquitous assistant.
Yep.
Did they use those phrases this year? Even
They
though
definitely did. They started
Okay,
off right off the bat with ambient intelligence and the ability, and they talked about it with the device now being able to recognize people and use an array of sensors, whether it be, you know, voice, kind of voice models that would determine if you're talking towards the device or you're talking away from the device, whether it be cameras about just even proximity sensors that like, hey, somebody's in the room, type of thing. So they did talk about that, that the devices live in your homes and have these kind of this collection of sensors that are working together to try to improve the experience. And then that, you know, thing that you're communicating with also lives in a home that has, you know, 1 to 10 to 20 smart home devices that are, you know, controlling things
right.
like
So
your lights or your other things.
So what I read from it, I mean, they talked a lot about using the LLM with smart home control. And okay, that's vaguely interesting to me, I guess. But I feel like that's not a huge leap from what we were doing now with smart home, you know, with Thread and Matter.
Yeah.
You know, that's not a big jump in my mind.
Yeah, I think it's that you know, the idea is that it's using the LLM so that you can have more, you know, less specificity in, you know, in your talking to a device, than having to know it exactly by its name.
Well, that bugs me a little because did we really? Well, I don't know because I don't have any smart home devices set up on my Alexa. I have them all on the Google side. But on the Google side, I don't refer to them by specific names. You know, I can say turn on the light, and I don't have anything called the light. I have a lamp, but it's not the light. You know, so it feels like, I mean, to me, I guess what I'm saying is it feels like to me that's already good fuzzy natural language understanding that doesn't require an LLM.
Right.
And that's, don't get me wrong, it's not that that's bad, but I feel like we have that already. I feel like the kind of next level stuff is saying, you know, things like, if my lamp is on, then turn off the hallway light. You know, that's a more complicated thing that involves multiple devices and understanding the state, you know, understanding the context and having an action associated with a query. That's more LLM territory.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if so and so is home, then turn the light on.
Yeah, I think we're early because the example that they used is that, you know, maybe you've installed a new light in your living room, but you forgot what you called it, you know, or somebody else has forgot what it's called. It's the next week, and you say, turn on the new light in the living room. And it knows the metadata that when this light was installed,
Okay.
which I guess is kind of, you know, that it is a little bit next level, but it isn't, you know.
Right. It still seems to me that's not really, I mean, that's.
LLUs could have slots, so
Yeah.
it's not like, yeah.
But it requires thinking about the slot. So I kind of get it.
Yeah.
But I guess I feel like what's more interesting to me is that the new conversational model for building, I'm going to call them skills still, because I don't know they have a new name for them yet. Skills that work under the LLM. So that instead of providing a skill name, you're providing an API. You know, I think that's the much more interesting bit here in my mind.
Yeah, and there's not a lot out there. We'll go through this list of 5, and then we're going to circle back
Okay.
specifically
Okay.
about this.
Sorry, I forgot
Yeah,
we were finishing off this list of 5 still. So let's
I
finish
know
this list of
we
5
kind of
things.
just like start talking, but
Us
so the
off
third
track?
part where they're talking about personalization, so they want their LMs to be personalized, and so I think that's more about metadata that you can provide as a user. And one of the examples was, is my team playing this week? And
Okay.
it knows who your team is. Now, it doesn't say how that team name gets in there. Is there a list of personalization that you get, or the first time you ask, they ask you what's your favorite team, and then it keeps that in a slot someplace? That second would be a lot more interesting to me.
Yes.
If it's able to identify and just kind of ask you conversationally as you're happening. But any personalization I'm a fan of. So we'll have to see how that actually got implemented.
Yeah.
The next point, they're talking about personality, and this seemed to be, Alexa's always had some sort of a personality. You could ask questions. It tells dad jokes. But what seemed to be a little bit of the focus on this was the ability to use language models to not only make Alexa's voice more expressive and more natural sounding, but it could, for example, match like if you were to talk to Alexa in an excited manner, then the response could be the same response, but in a little bit more excited response. And so
that's interesting, but it seems fraught with danger.
It could be, yes.
I mean, I can the kind of classic scenario for that would be something like, I'm shouting at Alexa saying that my bank account has been drained to 0. And Alexa starts shouting back at me, I'm sorry, I don't understand. That's not going to go over well.
That would be funny to see for once.
Once.
But after that, it probably wouldn't be. One time, that would be funny. Yeah, I think they're talking about different things where they would infuse. It could be laughter, it could be ums, it could be pauses, more intonation for different words, just making it sound. And so where that's kind of interesting is if that flows over into responses, that maybe there's a different way in the future for developers, instead of using something like speech synthesis markup language to like very like small grain detail, would be to more generally kind of almost like a prompt say, this is the response, but this is kind of how I want you to say the response. That would be interesting. And the last part is trust. They just talked about that trust is important. And so you can turn the camera off, you can turn the sound off, you can opt out of various different things like visual ID. You have control of privacy settings, what's recorded, so it's kind of the same old. It didn't seem like there was anything specifically new when it's talked about LLMs.
But here's an interesting point, and this is something we've talked about before, is that the notion of context is inherently in conflict with the notion of privacy. Every time that that I want to invoke, that I want that custom information used, it has to reveal that custom information somewhere.
Yeah.
And that to me feels like a challenge. And because one of the things I'm curious about when it comes to the customization is how much information gets handed over to this API endpoint at a time. Will the API endpoint know who is making the request? And a pseudonymous who is making the request. But I can build up a knowledge base over time just with that. True. If I'm providing weather information, for example, and 90% of the time you're asking about Ottawa, Canada, it's a safe bet you live in Ottawa, Canada.
Yeah.
just a guess. Or, if you're asking about one location and you suddenly start asking about another location, safe bet you're away from home.
Yep, you moved or you're on vacation.
Right.
Yeah.
So this, I think it's, it sounds easy. Oh yeah, we're going to protect your data. We're going to protect your privacy. I think the reality is more complicated.
Yeah.
And contra-wise, if I'm not providing that user information because I want to retain privacy, and this leads to something that didn't get mentioned, and that's monetization. Because that's what Alexa developers have been complaining about so far. That's the big complaint these days, is how does this get monetized? It's the big question that you and I asked when we talked about OpenAI is what's the monetization vector?
Right.
And there wasn't an obvious one. So somewhere we need, somehow it's got to get paid for.
Yep.
And if that's not made clear somewhere, this isn't going to succeed.
Yeah, it is interesting, and especially when we start talking more, details. Using an NLU seems to be, less expensive than using
Oh yeah.
an LLM. You have to a lot more care about, how many tokens you're using and how much this is going to cost and stuff. And that's, just one additional concern that that a developer has. Now, is there going to be a way to create, custom skills and utilize Alexa's LLM, for free? For, what is the
Well,
what
I mean,
what's the cost behind that?
no, that's a good question. I mean, they hinted at, it looks like they hinted at a way to build, to basically bring your own LLM, basically use an LLM in a skill the same way that you can now. And it sounds like they hinted at improvements to that are coming.
Yeah. Okay.
But,
So let's talk about the three things that they talked about. So there's
okay,
so there's the event, and they did talk about some of these things in the event, but then right after, the event, there was a blog post on the Alexa blog under skill builders that specifically talked about this, and the post is officially titled "New Developer Tools to Build LLM Powered Experiences with Alexa." So the three main points that they want to bring out is that you can, with a no-code tool, use Alexa's LLM. First thing that they wanted to bring out is that you could bring your own APIs,
right,
and use Alexa's LLM. So that's kind of the.
I wouldn't say that's a no-code tool, but okay.
Well, what I think what they're talking about and what they've kind of they've hinted at is that you're not going to have to write the code for the API. It's kind of like the agent model for LangChain, where you define the API, you describe the API, and then it gets used. So there's some place where you define all the metadata about the API, but you're not necessarily writing the code.
Right. You're defining the API and you're describing what this API does.
Correct.
So it requires, essentially good comments. So, right off the bat, we've eliminated 95% of the developers out there. That snark aside, and it's probably myself included. So yeah, you're providing an API, you're providing human readable documentation that's similar to what OpenAI is doing, similar to what Bixby, it's similar to what Bixby was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I've got a bunch of questions with this still, but okay. So that's one. I wouldn't call it no code though.
Well, yeah, I think their point is that, if you have the API, if you're bringing your own API, then yes, you wrote the API, but you could bring somebody else's API in and describe it with metadata and and use that.
I think it's pushing the definition of no code.
Yeah. So
that aside, I think that's probably the most significant bit of the three.
Yeah.
is
So
this method.
yeah. So and it doesn't necessarily say that it's mutually exclusive per se, but the second one is that you can bring your own content to Alexa's LLM. So that's that's the vector database. That's the
What that sounded to me like, and maybe I misread this, it sounds similar to what Google was saying, was that you publish a you point Alexa at a document, and it now can use that document to answer questions.
yeah.
So it isn't even you're pointing at a
There's not
vector.
really a lot of detail in this document that they tell you like how that's happening, but you are able to describe your own content, and I don't know if you have to put it in a specific place or if you have to host it in a certain way and reveal where it is, or kind of what options there are. But in a previous in one of the diagrams towards the top of it, there is a place where it's showing LLMs and vector stores and long-term memory. So it does seem like it's instead of customizing Alexa's LLM with kind of augmenting the model, you're providing content
See, to
for it
me,
to access, right?
and again, I'm not entirely sure what it means, but to me, it sounds like Google, when Google was saying, put this markup in the header, and as we crawl it, it now becomes available to answer questions in Google Assistant. And that's one of the few things that still, that still works.
Yeah.
It sounds like Alexa is saying, give us a URL and we will crawl that URL and make its content available to when people ask us questions in chatting. That's kind of what it sounds like. So that was 2.
And then the third part is bringing your own LLM. So like if we were to use the tools we have today for Alexa, the best way that you have to get to what the user said is to use the search query slot type. But that requires some sort of an anchor phrase. But let's say that we can get across that. We can formulate the conversation model with the skill so that kind of like Jeopardy, where you always want to answer in the form of a question, but if you always say my answer is, and then blah 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 blah, then you have access to whatever the person said, right?
Or in the example that I think is what the way they want people to use it is, if you say search for carrots and peas, it will send you the carrots and peas part.
Yes.
So there's always a chunk that gets removed because that's the phrase that it needs to look for to know the rest of it is free form.
Yeah. So yeah, it gets a little bit more challenging, but it's like, what I want you to do is answer the question about blah, 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 blah. Right. And then, so using the tools today, there is a way to get a large portion of what the user said. That's something that Google gave you out of the box years ago. Amazon's always been kind of private on that part, and hasn't really given the developers tools, except for now the search query, which has been around for a while. But you can now take that, and then you can do whatever you want to call an API, do whatever to then formulate the response and send the response back. And that's just kind of the basic peas and carrots of how to create an Alexa skill, right? But what they're saying now is that you could use an LLM to you could use that input, help to generate a prompt, send that off to an LLM, get the response back, and then send that through TTS and get back. Now the problem has been, which we talked about before, is just the latency in doing that.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like what they're saying is we're going to make it easier than the search method.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't sound like they're really offering anything else. It's not like they're saying use our LLM. It sounds like they're just saying,
and that point, I think they're kind of trying to do basically a catch-all. It's like, hey, we've got we've got you taken care of with LLMs. If you've got an API that
Right.
you want to have something, the Alexa do something, then go ahead and use method one. If you want to be able to ask questions and use our LLM, but bring your own content, come on over. We've got that as well. And if you've got your own LLM, don't forget about Alexa. It's a great device that you can talk to and have a conversation with your LLM, right? Whatever
Yeah.
that is. I think that's kind of their approach.
That's about what it sounds like. Yeah. All of that, it sounds really cool. It sounds really interesting. Have they given a date for when any of that's going to be available?
They have not.
Is even chat with Alexa or Let's Chat working
I
yet, or
think
Let's
they
Talk?
mentioned early next year.
Okay.
So kind of gonna have to wait on that. I love the document or the diagrams that they have on this. They got a couple of like Alexa orchestration, and they've got kind of. I'm like, yeah, I'm all for diagrams, cool. And then you start jumping into some of the examples, and it's
Yeah.
like, this is an example of adding descriptors to your API. This is what it looks like to add descriptors to your content. This is and then they kind of skip over the bring your own LLM no code example with that, and then they jump into kind of like, how do you do this with smart devices?
Well, so I think actually the fourth method, I think the smart devices is the fourth method, because it sounds like, while that's related to the other three,
Yeah,
it's separate.
it is definitely, yeah, it's definitely separate, and they talk about um two different ways. What are they saying here? There's like an action controller, which is kind of more very similar to the way that you would interact with smart home devices today. Talking about specific states that are that the device supports, and different metadata. Then there is something called dynamic controller. So the dynamic controller, the example they gave is like, you talk to your lights and say, make it look spooky. Now,
Okay.
spooky might not be something that or that's even, but that's something that the device manufacturer could say, hey, we've got people that are asking for spooky. What would spooky be? And then they could, come up with something for spooky.
Okay.
Or but that does seem like it's
Yeah. Okay.
it's passing information that wasn't already there, that wasn't known at the time that this interface or interaction was created between
Yeah. Okay.
the skill code and the smart home device. It makes it more dynamic so that it could
Okay. So
adapt to things in the future.
I guess I feel like the question I have, the fundamental question I have. So we identified four types. The fourth one, smart home, monetization's obvious, because it's meant to work with stuff that gets sold.
Yeah.
Third, monetization is at least known. I'm assuming that it's an Alexa skill.
Yeah.
So we already know what that looks like. We may not like it, but we already know what it looks like. Documentation, the monetization aspect is totally up in the air. But one could argue, this is only for, it's meant for frequently asked questions and support material and other stuff like that. So, they're asking questions with an intent to do something with your product, your service already. So it's indirect monetization maybe. But even there's some question. And the first one I think is totally there. I think somebody needs to answer the monetization question quickly.
Yeah, I would agree. So what's not clear? It seems like that 3 and 4 are probably closer to skills as we know them today.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you can at least imagine that the monetization options that are available today in some form would be available to those, right?
Right.
It might
Well, I mean,
make
it
more or
seems like
less sense depending on what you're doing, but yeah.
right. Neither of them seem like they're major changes to what's going on today.
Yeah, that's kind of my gut feel on it too. The first two, it's not even clear that you need to use to invoke your skill.
Right.
Is this something that kind of is like a name-free interaction type of thing?
Well, so I
Or
think it's
does it,
along those lines. I mean, I
yeah,
think let me address two first. I feel like two, is basically just saying we don't have as sophisticated a web crawler as Google does. So if you want us to know about your content, let us know.
yeah,
And that's not a criticism. That's a
yeah,
I just feel like that whether or not that's in reality what it is, that's kind of the impression I get.
yeah, could be, yeah,
The first one though, there are all sorts of questions that I don't feel, I haven't read answers to yet. I haven't even read the questions too much yet.
yeah,
It's things like, and these are questions that were raised with OpenAI, and OpenAI had, in some cases, answers, but not great ones. They're questions that have been raised over and over again. It's things like, if I have two APIs that offer the weather, which one gets used?
yep,
And there are known methods to solve this. Is Amazon using any of them? We don't know.
yeah,
The obvious one is you need to install the skill from the skill store first, which in some ways may answer the monetization question. And that's a reasonable approach. You don't get the API until you install the API. And that's kind of the attitude that OpenAI has taken. And it makes sense.
yeah,
But it now means an extra step. It's
yeah,
now, it now increases the friction. If I am out surfing, or if I'm going to go out surfing and I say, hey, what's the surf in Redondo Beach today? Is it going to say, here are five skills that can help you with surf information? Which do you want to use?
yeah. And is Alexa wanting its 1P experience to,
To say that, to expose that to expose that fact. But at the same time, and this kind of gets to the monetization question some more,
yeah,
it's the credit. And if I have a skill that is providing the weather, at you know at what point is Alexa getting all the credit and I'm getting none of the credit even?
yeah.
How do you address that?
Nobody knows that it's getting the information from me. They might even, I could see Alexa could say, hey, this is something that we want to take care of, and we'll have our own first party experience that takes over unless you specifically say that you want somebody else's weather.
Right. Or but then what,
Or
but how do I know that this is an Alexa experience? How do I know that,
yep,
if I'm asking for something that Alexa does not have as a first party experience, if I'm asking for train information,
yep,
one could assume that there's only one API for that per location, but it's not always true.
not always true. Yep.
How does Alexa pick a default one, and how does it know to let me know that there are other options?
Yeah. And it's,
And
is it a situation where they're going to announce that this is where you're getting your information from,
and
and
if
allow
it
you to
does,
make that as a preference?
right, and if it does announce it, is that taking away from the Alexa conversational experience?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, how do I get credit?
Yeah. Or is it something where, depending on the number of queries you get, then Amazon pays you so much based on just how often that you get invoked?
Right, but Amazon's moving away from that model,
Yeah.
or moved away from that model when it came to skills, and I can't see them wanting to return to it.
Hmm.
And even if so, at what point do I find out how many different users are using this? I mean,
Yeah.
it's great to know that I've got 10,000 hits on my API. Is that from one person hitting it 10,000 times?
Yeah.
Is it from 10,000 people hitting it once?
Once. Yeah.
What, these are metrics that are important,
Yeah.
and I need to get them somehow. And I don't hear people talking about this. So I legitimately, it's not that I don't mean to pick on Amazon here alone, because I think I said the same things when I picked on OpenAI. If Google ever gets around to doing this sort of thing, I'll pick on them too.
Yeah.
But there are lots and lots of questions that aren't there yet.
Yeah, I would agree. Until we start getting some examples of like, oh, this is an example of one, this is an example of two. They've said a number of different names. They've said Volley, they've said BMW, which I'm not going to have a BMW anytime soon, but Sleep Jar, some other ones. So I don't know if they're going to be giving examples of one, two, or three. But we'll have to start seeing some of these examples and playing with them and kind of see how this works out. But
I'm excited.
It would be nice to have conversations with them while they're trying to figure it out.
Right.
Being a developer that's done this for a while, but
as an Alexa champion, you have a better chance than some of us.
Maybe not.
As a GDE, I understand that from anyway. So no, this is all exciting. This is all great. Yeah. I feel like there are questions, but I'm hoping the questions will be answered sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and one of the big questions is what is this going to look like for developers going forward? Yeah. If they are talking about some sort of a no code configuration for options 1 and 2, does that still require a developer, but just not as intensive of an experience? Can you get out experiences quicker? Or?
Certainly for option 1, you still need a developer to build what's behind the API.
True.
And that's nothing small. And it's nothing small. And this is something you and I have been arguing for 3 years now. We've said, voice development is building on your own skills, your existing skills. And I think this is just bringing that forward one more step.
Yeah.
But it's exciting times. It's thrilling to see. I can't wait to see if Google counters this at all and what that brings to the competition. But I look forward to talking about this more with you, Mark, on future episodes of Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs. Take care, Alan.
Take care, Mark. Have a great week.
You too.